when the corporation finds something new, they just abandon the town.
Yeah.
They don't try and like repurpose the workers or like see what they can. They just leave. They leave all their old buildings to just like rot, the people to just rot, everything.
She was a valuable asset, and if she was in that town, able to build that town and make that town better, the outcome could have been severely different. But Lumon poaches these people and takes them for their own use to put them in a better spot. Not only are they taking the resources, they're taking the best people, you know, with the Wintertide apprenticeship. This is all grooming.
Creating those kind of rituals means that anytime you're going through something tough, you're turning to Kier instead of trying to think through it yourself. And then in them saying, you know, we have the answers, you just follow these steps, you know, talk to somebody that knows Kier and they will help you out. You're giving up some of your freedom.
Hello and welcome to Road Goes Ever On and On. Today, Sterling and I are talking about the hit Apple TV show Severance Season 2, Episode 8, Sweet Vitriol, so spoilers are ahead. And if you are enjoying this content, a like would be appreciated, and subscribe so you don't miss a single one of our episodes. And turn on that bell for notifications. And with that, Sterling, what are your overall thoughts on this episode? Very different.
Very different. Okay, so I think this is going to be an unpopular opinion. I think we've been having a few of those. But I actually really enjoyed this. I know that it kind of slows down the overall pace. I know that it's told in a very different way than a lot of the other episodes, but I thought it was absolutely beautiful, and I loved how much of this like show don't tell thing that it did. A lot of it was very visual storytelling, where it implied things through the shots that they had, but didn't like directly tell you all the information. And I loved it.
Yeah, no, it maybe not my favorite episode because, you know, I want more Mark. I want more the severed floor. I want more Milchek. But I did think it was nice because I feel like Miss Cobel, Patricia Arquette, has been very absent from this season.
Yeah, she's been sidelined.
And she was like one of the best parts of the first season. Like just her overall menacing, you know, not sure what she's doing, what her plan is, what her goal is. And, you know, this might not have been my favorite episode just because it was shorter. There was not a lot to it, but there was a lot to it. But overall, I did enjoy the episode because I think it was cool to see like her origin story. Where did she come from?
It was really cool seeing where she kind of came from. But like once again, I love the storytelling technique. I love how there were moments where there wasn't much dialogue and they just allowed the visuals to tell the story, and the visuals told a great story. You know, we see crumbling infrastructure. There's drug use. There's, you know, kind of blink and you miss it, fading logos. And all of this is, it asks that the viewer pays close attention, because if you don't, you'll miss a lot of the dots, and it's not connecting those dots for you. You know, it's asking you to pay attention and to kind of figure out some of this. Like, it doesn't directly tell you that this ether plant that used to be there has led to a lot of lung disease, but they've shown it. You know, they showed it in that old woman in the cafe who has like the oxygen thing, and also in that one comment when Cobel said, Kier and Imogen met at the ether mill, and he responds with, was she hacking up a lung at the time? So they're not laying out explicitly. They're not saying that this ether mill ruined the people that worked for it. And also they depended on it because it was the only lifeline in the town. Right. They imply that, and it's beautifully implied. Like, I loved how they told that story and how they don't hold your hand, and they expect you to be an adult and like do some of that work yourself. And I really enjoyed that.
It did. And maybe that's why I'm just a little lazy. I didn't want to do all this work for this episode. No, I'm teasing, of course. But yeah, I think that you get a lot of the history from the dialogue. Like you were saying, she mentions like, oh, we were colleagues back then. And he was like, colleagues, more like child labor. So
yes,
how Lumon took advantage of this town by employing these young children. And then we see that also with Miss Huang, is they're still taking that ability of using child labor, which I feel like Lumon has always been kind of a mystery. And I think that this episode did a great job of like really showing the darker side of Lumon and not, like Severing aside is pretty dark in itself. And what they're doing to Miss Casey is pretty dark. But like maybe 50 years ago, 40 years ago, what they would do to like take advantage of like small areas, extract the natural resources. And then once they got what they needed, they just leave the town, despot.
And not just that, but also really kind of like ruin the lives of the people that are there, make them. So this reminded me of the coal industry. I watched this episode, and then there's a great YouTube channel, Climate Town, and I saw an episode on the coal industry. And to me, it's so reminiscent of like how much the coal industry built up, how much the electrical grid was dependent on coal back in the day. That was like where all of the energy came from. So it was so important. But the people that worked these, they would die from a myriad of things, whether or not it was like while they were actively working or once they were done working the coal mines, and then they end up with like all of these health problems from it. And then on top of that, a lot of these coal companies would also force the laborers to buy their own equipment, and it had to be from the company store. They had exorbitant prices so that the workers would actually end up in debt to the companies and wouldn't have any choice but to continue working for these companies for the rest of their life. As it was like indentured servitude. It was like another form of slavery. And that it completely reminds me of this, where not only is this company, stripping the land of its like natural resources, but it's also it's considering the people as like one of those resources and stripping the land of that and just bleeding the people dry.
Yeah. And I feel like it just like decimated the town in general, where it's like, if you look at like where Mark lives and where Rickon and Devin live and the severed floor and the juxtaposition to this like town that is just like the buildings look dilapidated. The cars are all broken down. The people themselves just look like crap. Like they're in this like cafe, and it's like barely a cafe. It's just like this dark, dingy looking place.
Yeah.
And I think that like this, this episode was very muted. There wasn't very bright, vibrant colors. It had a very bluish, black, grayish hue to most of the shots. And I think that was such a great choice to show how broken this town is from Lumon. And it's all because of Lumon.
And then the fact that that's driven the people there to all this drug use. Like, it seems like the ether abuse is rampant in this town, and that it started at such a young age. She said the last time she did it was when she was 8. We don't know the first time that she started it. And that's implied that like she's already in the ether mill working at this point.
Well, the child labor,
at least 10-hour shifts. because he said at one point, "You ready to man the vat for 10 hours?" So they're really getting worked. I thought it was so messed up, kind of learning about the history. And then when the corporation finds something new, like new technology to move on, they just abandon the town.
Yeah.
They don't try and like repurpose the workers or like see what they can. They just leave. They leave all their old buildings to just like rot, the people to just rot, everything.
And we see that Lumon as a whole like poaches the best people. So like,
yes,
right, it takes all of the, they have all these people working and they're like, okay, which people will be the best and which will be the brightest, and then we take them and we repurpose them somewhere else to even make the town more of a failure. Like if Harmony Cobel was able to, we'll get to this more, create the Severance program. Right. But if she was able to do that, like she was a valuable asset. And if she was in that town, able to build that town and make that town better, the outcome could have been severely different. But Lumon poaches these people and takes them for their own use to put them in a better spot. And I think that like, not only are they taking the resources, they're taking the best people as well to really screw over the town.
Yeah, it really shows that this company doesn't care. I actually think that there might be a little bit of like a difference between Kier, maybe in his original thoughts and teachings, and then maybe like the current leadership and like how things are run nowadays. And so like I wonder whether or not this is how Kier would want things done, or if this is more of like James Lumon.
James Egan?
Yes.
Yeah, but I do feel like the Egans in general have had this succession of Egan, ownership. And right. I don't know. To me, it does feel like it. I think this has been a thing from the beginning, right? They worked in the ether mill. They're still working in ether mills. I don't know. It definitely seems that this has been going on for such a long time. Like Kier was maybe this original constructor of this industry / what are we doing? How are we exploiting people? And that it's just been continuously.
It's just interesting to me that Harmony Cobel says Kier's knowledge is for all. That's what James tells her, and so it seems like the idea is like this knowledge you have doesn't belong to any one person. It should be Kier's to share with everyone. But then James takes personal credit. To me, that's not like, oh, that, it doesn't matter who created this. We're going to use this to better the world. He strips her of that knowledge and then he takes personal credit. So she seems so devout to me. Mm-hmm. I honestly think that she lived by the 9 principles. In season 1, we saw those posters in her house, right? She like handmade posters of the 9 principles that she had up, that kind of surrounded that like Kier shrine is what it kind of looked like. And when she didn't know what to do about the Petey situation, she went through the 9 principles and then she got to Wiles. And that's when she realized like, oh, I need to use my brain and I need to be a little bit tricky in order to accomplish this. So she really lives by this. I wonder whether or not she is not necessarily not believing in Kier anymore and the principles, and whether or not it's like she is not believing in the current leadership. Because I think that can happen in religions where you can still believe in whatever it is you believe in, but you think that maybe it's not being run the way that makes you feel right.
My take is that first off, when she says Kier's knowledge is for all, I think that when that was implied, it's like Kier has knowledge over everything, right? Like Kier is this god figure. So Kier already knew the ability of making the Severance program, making the Severance chips. And so to me, it seems like they used that Kier's knowledge is for all was James' way of taking that thing. He's like, you have this knowledge, so this is shared knowledge, but I'm going to make this. And I think that because she felt like, okay, I created the Severance program, I have a huge bargaining chip now to like become this better figure of what I like, the person I want to be inside of Lumon. And since she went to Helly and was like, hey, like, I want to talk to James, I want to get this figured out. And Helly kind of brushed her off. Like, and Helly is still brainwashed from, she thinks that James created the Severance program because she talks about when he brought the chip home for the very first time. And so to me, Miss Cobel is waking up to the fact like, crap, maybe I was being brainwashed. And I think this is when we see her turn. Like, this is her turning to the side of the Scouts.
I can definitely see that, but once again, I kind of wonder whether or not that's not a full pivot, not like a pivot away from Kier, but just like the way things are being run right now by the group that are being run right now. Because this episode sheds really interesting light on her, finding out that she is the person that created the Severance program. I'd asked this question before during season 1 about, it seemed like she's two people. You know, she would be so nice. Mrs. Selvig, you know, would be so nice to Mark, even when she wasn't being watched. When he's in his house, she's in hers, and she's watching him through the window, you know, drinking to deal with his pain of his loss. She said something touching that made it seem like she really cared for him. But then as Miss Cobel on the inside with the innies, she's throwing a coffee mug at Mark's head. And it, like, I wondered whether or not there was like two people in there. But now I see that she dealt with something horrible. That's why, like, she had this terrible life experience that made her wonder, what if people wouldn't have to go through this, you know, and they could live this separate life? So she personally feels for Mark, and I wonder whether or not she's somehow compartmentalized, and it's like, kind of like a lot of the other people, doesn't really consider the innies to be real people. And so, you know, once she sees like the innie, it's like the whatever, they're there to help the outie deal with their trauma, you know, and it doesn't matter what they go through. And that kind of makes more sense now. Like, I do see how it is one person that really feels for these outies, but then doesn't necessarily, and has like created this whole situation. It's wild.
Yeah, no, and I can definitely see these two sides of Miss Cobel as well, because like we found out that it was her mother that was dying, and it does seem like her mother hated Lumon. So like her mother and so Sissy loved Lumon, her mother hates Lumon, and potentially her mother gets sick, you know, and probably got sick because of Lumon, right? It's got a breathing tube.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. Yep.
She worked at probably the ether mill and was having this lung complications just like everyone else in this sad town. And so I think that Ms. Cobel probably has this like hatred of Lumon because they killed her mom and her mom was anti-Lumon. But then also Sissy probably took over raising her a little bit when her mom got sick. Yep. And so that's what pushed her into Kier Egan's arms, essentially. And then doing all this work for them, the Wintertide apprenticeship. I think this all shows that, like, okay, well, then she got into the apprenticeship and things were getting better for her. She wasn't stuck in this ether factory anymore. She was climbing this corporate ladder. And so like the belief in Kier needs to be more tangible now because of like the events that she went through. And I think her realizing that maybe they're not as great as possible, I think we could see a full turn with her.
The messed up thing is like, so her going to, this Myrtlegan school for girls, obviously since it's an Egan school, it seemed like they were teaching Kier's principles, kind of all of his beliefs. This is her ticket out. And so she has to lean into it and be her absolute best in order to get out of this dying town where she's worked at a young age, overworked, where it's these terrible conditions, where she'll probably end up with some kind of lung disease if she stays there. And so it forces her even further into the Egan's world because it's an Egan school.
Right. I feel
so like she has to like love everything that they do in order to kind of escape, which is why she embraced this stuff.
Yeah, I feel like with the Wintertide apprenticeship and the Myrtle School for Girls, this is all grooming. Like it's all grooming her to be.
Yes.
So like, I feel like the default is that she hates Lumon, way back when she's younger, probably. And then as she's been growing older, she's just been groomed after Wintertide, the all girls school. And then getting into Lumon, I think it all just compounds on itself. And I think after all that she's done for Lumon and how they treated her, I think she realizes that, okay, maybe Lumon isn't like, this is her escape from the cult. Like I thought it was going to be Milchek, but it looks like Milchek dug deeper, and maybe she turns again. But I also have a little weird theory.
Okay.
That Ms. Cobel is Helly's mom.
Okay.
And the only reason I think that is, again, with this whole grooming situation of Ms. Cobel, we see that she gets the Wintertide apprenticeship, and it like, if you read the quick blurb, it talks about how Jane gave it to her, and it sounded like they were working pretty close together on this Severance program or chip. We haven't seen Helly's mom. We've gotten no clue of Helly's mom. And part of this power Jane might have, he may have had relations with Ms. Cobel to make Helly. But I don't know if Ms. Cobel knows, or if she might be severed too, Ms. Cobel, or have the chip in her. She might have been one of the first people to have it. And then she could have been pregnant with Helly and not remembered it. But what one theory I have.
Yeah. That's interesting. I like that.
But I've been wrong a lot this season, so who knows?
I mean, the show is so wild. Like you have to swing big if you want to be right, and that also means that you're going to miss big. Like the show doesn't do easily predictable things. So if you want to predict anything, you've got to think of something crazy. A lot of them are going to be off, and they're going to be off by a ton, but it's still fun.
It is fun. I love predicting.
It's a lot of fun. I also thought one of the other fun things about this episode was this was one that had a lot of great details if you paused on things. Like you talked about reading the blurb about the Wintertide apprenticeship. One of the rooms that Miss Cobel went into had a ton of interesting things. The hallway outside had a plaque, and the plaque said quarterly striver, fourth quarter, year of vision, which I'll get back to that in a moment, youth apprentice matron, Celestine Sissy Cobel. And year of vision didn't make any sense to me until I was freeze framing on one of the shots in the room, and I saw, there's kind of another like Kier shrine looking thing. And on it, as well as like 2 candles and a bone, which was very interesting, were cards for the 9 principles. And of course, vision is one of those principles. Also, there were these, I don't know exactly what they were, but there were these things hanging. It said like Lumen Ether, and then it would have Year of, and then one of the principles. So I feel like the principles played a much bigger role in this one.
Yeah.
Sissy even said something about, if Miss Cobel's mom, like if Charlotte Cobel had lived by the principles, maybe she would have kind of like died happier, was what was implied.
Right.
I don't remember the exact quote.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, if you remember the waffle party from season 1, it was interesting that there's the cat of 9 tails on the bed, each of one of the tails representing one of the principles.
Right.
And that it seemed like the 9 principles are used to help you tame the 4 tempers.
Right. And we did see that in the Taming of the 4 Tempers. Kier Egan has the cat of 9 tails when he's going down into the cave to tame the 4 tempers. And the 4 tempers were dancing for Dylan at the waffle party. But like, and the principles don't like seem bad. Like Vision, I remember there's Cheer. Like that was Irv's favorite principle, was Cheer. Like, so there does seem to be like good values, like good moral values in the principles. But like, taming the 4 tempers, is it like basically that you have these 4 tempers inside of you, and that if you have the 9 principles, it just buries them? You can basically quiet the 4 tempers, like never experience woe, never have malice, don't enjoy frolic, and never dread anything, like as long as you value these 9 principles.
I think it's just another way to have control, is this whole thing of, one, by creating rituals where you like, that's what that desk with like the Kier shrine looked like, a place that you would go to and almost like pray over the 9 principles, like go over those, on a regular basis. Creating those kind of rituals means that anytime you're going through something tough, you're turning to Kier instead of trying to think through it yourself. And then in them saying, we have the answers, you just follow these steps, talk to somebody that knows Kier and they will help you out. You're giving up some of your freedom by accepting that somebody else has that for you, They have the answer, so I don't need to look for the answers.
And we do see that most people that have faith in Kier, even Sissy, create these shrines to Kier. Like that is a very cultish behavior of just creating these, shrines. And we saw that Miss Cobel had one, Sissy had one. Sure Milchek has one that we'll see at some point. Just very cultish behavior.
And I think that's kind of the power of something like the 9 principles, even though they're very simple. And a bunch of companies have things like that, where they have like their core principles, and they're all similar type things. Like they're all positive traits that you want humans to have. Like,
yeah,
they're not, it's nothing like mind blowing.
Right.
You can find the same thing in self-help books.
Yeah. Or the you that you are books.
Right. So it's nothing amazing, but by having these be like these rituals that people turn to, they give up a part of themselves.
Yeah. Okay. One thing I also liked, going back to storytelling and showing and not telling. I remember when we talked about the first season, we saw Miss Cobel on her bed, and her bed looked very small. It looked like a jail cell bed.
Yep.
And in this episode, we saw what their beds looked like at the house. And so to me, seeing that previous bed means that like she wanted this place that feels a little bit more modern to feel more like home and have those older looking beds that, you know, single twin bed with the metal frame.
Yeah.
So I thought that was, you know, not going to bring that up probably. We haven't even seen inside her apartment ever since. But that is just this one little thing that has continued from first season to second season.
I love the attention to detail in the show is so good. There were a few other like hidden details that they had in this episode that makes it richer. So like when you talked about the write up about the Wintertide apprenticeship, to the left of that was something about her being the valedictorian and a write up about that. And it mentioned that she was the president of the Goat Husbandry Club.
Interesting.
Which makes me wonder whether or not goats and their relation to all this other stuff was something she brought into Lumon, kind of like Severance, or if that's something that was already part of the Myrtle Egan School for Girls, and therefore something that was, you know, brought in through James or somebody else. But it's just interesting that connection goes so far back.
Well, yeah. Okay, so I totally didn't see that part. Thanks for letting me know. I mean, it's all about the goats. We don't know what it is with these goats, but it's all about the goats. But also, this story with Ms. Cobel, I think, is going to tie in with Fields and Bert because, you know, Jamie Egan said that the Severance chip came out 12 years ago, and clearly Harmony had more work done with that. And I think that there will be a period between that 12 years and what was it, 20 years? 12 and 20 is what Field said, I believe.
Something like that, yeah.
Which I think will have a connection to Ms. Cobel, possibly Fields, Bert, and James, all dealing with this Severance chip. When Field said your old partner to Bert, makes me think Cobel might be that partner. Potentially. Just because now we know that it's existed longer, potentially it was created by someone else. I think there's a little bit more to this that we're going to I think that we're going to get more of this in the final 2 episodes. But with that, I think our journey has come to an end. Thank you folks so much for joining in. Come back next week as we do the second to last episode, episode 9 of Severance Season 2. We look forward to having you there. Until next time, I'm Mark. This is Sterling.
Thanks.